在当今世界专制独裁政权中，北朝鲜的金正恩、金与正这对兄妹党分工合作，一个负责试射导弹进行战争威慑，一个负责操控党国的宣传机器。金与正究竟是个什么样的人？他有多大的权力和影响力？金正恩和金与正的各司其职，对外揭示了朝鲜怎样的统治方式？朝鲜与中国和俄罗斯这三者之间又究竟是什么样的关系？美国之音记者金哲专访了金与正《全世界最危险的女人》一书的作者、朝鲜问题专家李晟允博士。以下是本期纵深视角专访的完整内容。
Dr. Lee, welcome to our program.
Thank you very much for having me.
First of all, congratulations to you on your critically acclaimed book.
Thank you, very kind, thank you.
Oh, your book titled The Sister, North Korea's Kim Yo-jong, the most dangerous woman in the world.
Yes, thank you, yeah.
And in Korea today, in North Korea today, under the dictator Kim Jong-un, we have not only the sister, but also the daughter. One is the co-ruler of the country, the other for the whole country to admire and adore. As we know, there's been a long tradition and a strong tradition of patriarchy in Korean culture. Yes, are we seeing the advent of a new Korean or East Asian culture now?
Well, we know that Korea for centuries had practiced a monarchy, an absolute medieval style king, not nearly as powerful as the Chinese emperor, but until the late 19th century to early 20th century, when the Korean dynasty fell at the hands of Imperial Japan, Korea was a monarchy styled on the European medieval divine right to rule kind of legitimacy. But the North Korean dynasty resembles such a medieval era absolutist monarchy. We know that the current North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, is the third generational leader. The state founder, Kim Il-sung, and the grandfather, Kim Il-sung, founded the DPRK, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. He was hand-selected by Stalin to be the ruler of the new North Korean state. And then, of course, when Kim Il-sung died in 1994, his son, Kim Jong-il, inherited power and assumed the throne. And when Kim Jong-il died in late 2011, that's when Kim Jong-un took over. The emergence of, prominent women surrounding Kim Jong-un, like his sister, Kim Yo-jong, like his daughter, who's a child still, like his wife, Lee Seol-ju, who is frequently seen at public events accompanying her husband. Also, the foreign minister of North Korea is a woman, Choi Sun-hee, which is unusual. And there's another prominent female figure, Hyun Song-wol, who is a colonel in the North Korean army, a trained singer, reportedly Kim Jong-il's former lady friend, girlfriend. So we see a lot of public female figures in North Korea, which is, to be noted. But I think in trying to answer your question, is this an indication, are they indicators of real fundamental change, feminism or greater equality given to women in North Korea? I think not. I think it's too soon to tell. And these are, they reflect personal preference of the current supreme leader. He trusts his sister. Presumably he loves his wife. Clearly he has tremendous affection for his very cute daughter. But what does that mean? Does that mean that Kim Jong-un, because he's a family man, is now not a dictator? Does that mean he's not going to pursue further expanding his nuclear arsenal because he has a softer image now surrounded by women? I don't think so.
Kim Jong-un reportedly has 3 kids, 1 boy. why do we see only one of his daughters?
Well, we don't really know whether Kim Jong-un has 2 children or 3 children. According to the South Korean Intelligence Service, National Intelligence Service, probably Kim Jong-un's eldest child is a boy. And this is based on intelligence. That is, there was a shipment delivery of toy guns going into Kim Jong-un's mansion some years ago. So presumably that was for a boy rather than a daughter. But these are clues, but they certainly are not firm indicators of Kim Jong-un having a boy. Well, we know he has a daughter because he's shown her, paraded her around on many occasions since November 2022. Why don't we see the boy? Some defectors think because the son might not resemble Lee Seol-ju, Kim Jong-un's wife, and may more resemble Hyun Song-ol, his Kim Jong-un's old girlfriend. That's an interesting speculation, but certainly one that falls within the realm of reasonable speculation, I think. But perhaps the boy will be revealed later on when he's older. Who knows?
And why is there such a secrecy around the Kim family? For instance, Kim Yo-jong, the sister, her name was not officially named or announced until March 2014. Why such secrecy?
And even then, when she was named, attending a concert with her brother and sister-in-law and other officials, few people made the connection that that was the name of this female figure we had seen before at the wake of their father, Kim Jong-il, in December 2011. And even Chinese sources, Chinese state media, got her name wrong. They didn't say Kim Yo-jong, it was more like Yu Kyung. And that was what we saw with respect to Kim Jong-un when he first emerged in 2009 as the successor. The South Korean Intelligence Service said his name is Kim Jong-un instead of Kim Jong-un because the word un is more common in female names. So all this secrecy, mystery surrounding the Kim dynasty adds another layer of aura, mystique to the very opaque regime that is North Korea. And in North Korean studies, these are real challenges. There are restraints. I mean, there are limits to doing research on North Korea, especially on the Kim family, because they are so secretive. One reason that Kim Jong-un, for example, has an extra incentive to guard his personal biographical family facts, secrets like the year of their birth even, is because their mother, Kim Yo-jong, Kim Jong-un's mother, was born in Osaka, Japan. And that means that her parents had moved from Korea to Japan at some point during the colonial rule under Japan, 1910 to 1945. And indeed, the mother, Ko Yong-hee, Miss Ko, her father worked in a textile factory which made clothes, uniforms for the Imperial Army. And then they moved to North Korea when Ko Yong-hee was in her late teens, and she was a trained dancer and caught the attention of the then Supreme Leader, Kim Jong-il. And these are inconvenient truths that really must be guarded and not revealed because under the insidious North Korean political class system, resettlers from Japan are given, and their children and grandchildren are given the lowest class. Largely, there are 3 classes, political, social classes in North Korea. The top loyal class, so-called. In the middle, you have the wavering class. They must be watched. Maybe they're okay, but we need to watch them. And then the despised, lowest, hostile class. Who gets to be branded a member of the hostile class? Well, aristocrats, former landowners, Christians, anyone who practices religion, and family members of those who have betrayed the nation and defected to South Korea or anywhere else, and also people who came from Japan. And then there's the even more concerning fact that must be closely guarded if you're Kim Jong-un or Kim Yo-jong, which is Ko Young-hee had a sister who, so the aunt of Kim Jong-un, who took care of the children when they lived in Switzerland approximately from 1996 to 2000. So their aunt and her husband and their own children lived together in Switzerland, and the aunt's family defected in 1998 to where? To what Kim Jong-un referred to as, in January 2021 in a major party congress, to our principal enemy, the main enemy of his nation, the United States of America. And when you have a family member who has defected again, then the family is punished. Sometimes they're sent to detention camps or to political prisoner concentration camps or even executed. And, you know, to have your aunt defect to the United States and your mother come from Japan, born in Japan, and of course, Kim Il-sung, he attended church. He played a church organ once upon a time when he was a boy. Kim Il-sung, his mother was a church deaconess. His father, Kim Il-sung's father, went to an American missionary established school, a Christian school. And if you are the progeny, a descendant of Christians, also you're branded as a hostile class, member of the hostile class. So if it's a great irony, but you know, Kim Jong-un should never have been given the title of the supreme leader because he has all these exes, you know, Christian, grandfather, mother born in Japan, aunt who betrayed the nation, and so on. So it's a tragic, comical irony.
Very interesting details. And has North Korean society or politics changed as a result of Kim Yo-jong's influence? In other words, have women over there benefited from her influence?
I don't see any signs. It's hard to see, of course, through all the layers of veils that North Korea wraps itself with. But if we were to project, if we were to speculate that these prominent female powerful figures, Kim Jong-un's wife, his sister, Hyun Song-wol, the foreign minister, and so on, were indicators of change, greater freedom, equality granted to women, I think we would see more of that. You know, I think at this point we're just projecting. Maybe North Korea is headed in that direction of greater equality between men and women, but we know, we have tens of thousands of defectors, people who have resettled in South Korea and other countries, and they tell a consistent story in that during the famine of the mid to late 1990s, women had the double burden of trying to find food, selling items to buy food with, and doing all the household chores, cooking and cleaning. That's a male-dominated chauvinistic culture. It's a Confucian culture, North Korea. So because North Korea is so patriarchal, as you said, and chauvinistic, male chauvinistic, we'll have to see more signs of change in order to be able to say, yes, the displaying of these prominent North Korean women did bring about some positive change. I don't see that yet.
For many North Korea watchers, Kim Yo-jong has been a very strange woman or a very strange top-ranking official, as she often issues demeaning, threatening, malicious diatribes. Yes. Yeah, for non-expert watchers, so what examples would you produce to show the typical or characteristic Kim Yo-jong?
Yes. She has worked in a very powerful agency, ministry, the Propaganda and Agitation Department, since probably 2012, but certainly since 2014. And I didn't understand it at the time, but as of early 2014, North Korea became, in issuing statements, these statements became intensely mean, intensely demeaning, extremely racist, sexist, homophobic, let me give you some examples. These are direct quotes, so I don't mean to offend anyone, but back then in 2014, 2015, the president of South Korea was a woman, first female elected leader in the Confucian civilization, before Tsai Ing-wen. And North Korea frequently slammed her as, quote, dirty old prostitute. In a particularly vile statement in May 2015, North Korea issued a statement referring to President Park as, quote, dirty, stinky, Obama, skirt-lifting old prostitute, end quote. And around the same time, North Korea referred to President Obama as, quote, wicked black monkey who should go back to his natural habitat in Africa and live off the breadcrumbs thrown at it by tourists, end quote. And also in 2014, we saw the release of a monumental United Nations human rights report on North Korea. And the chief drafter is Michael Kirby, who was a retired, very renowned judge, Australian judge, and who's openly gay. And North Korea referred to Judge Kirby as, quote, a lecher with a disgusting 40-year career in homosexuality. So while vile language is not new, these targeted, extremely racist, demeaning, sexist, violent, homophobic kind of language was kind of new. And now I've come to assume that it was Kim Yo-jong who would have signed off on all these statements. Of course, North Korea has the best writers out of college, propaganda, literary writers, people who write propaganda, write history, admiring, respecting the great leader and so forth. They're very talented. So I'm not saying Kim Yo-jong wrote all of this, but she would have approved all this as the de facto head of the propaganda and agitation department in 2014, 2015. But there's more. These vile invective, this kind of language has her signature, what I refer to in The Sister as Mona Lisa smirk smile. She wears a smirk. Sometimes it's charming. Sometimes she looks very pretty, smiling. But a lot of times she comes across as very arrogant. When she is seen in public in North Korean film, video, or when she visited South Korea for the Winter Olympics in February 2018, she carries herself, very erect posture, and that's because of training. All princes and princesses receive training on how to comport themselves in public to project, if not arrogance, then confidence. And she does that, but she has her chin up and wears sort of a smile, looks down on people. Sometimes some observers in Taiwan said she has nostril eyes because when she was seated across the table from the South Korean president, Moon Jae-in, she looked at him like this, as if she was, looking at the South Korean president out of her own nostrils instead of her eyes. So, this kind of self-absorption, perhaps narcissism, is bred. It develops very early as a young child because the North Korean royalty, they use not proper honorific language even to adults. They call adults by their first name, which in Asian culture is considered inappropriate and very rude. So they are spoiled, pampered, they've led an extravagant, extremely lavish life. That's their reality. So this kind of confidence and arrogance are bred in, it's part of who you are, whether it's Kim Yo-jong or Kim Jong-un or Kim Jong-il and so on.
Mm-hmm. And some people cherish an impression that Kim Yo-jong has been so far all bark and no bite. Is the impression true, half true, false, or dangerously false?
I think it's probably, I would argue, even dangerously misleading. It's false. Yes, she's a young, relatively young, photogenic woman, a pretty young lady. So she says mean things, but there's no bite in that statement. No. She has frequently said, she's issued more than 40 formal written statements since March 2020. And often she has said that her power, authority to take the next move, action, comes from comrade chairman, from her brother, Kim Jong-un, the party, and the state. So in June 2020, on June 4th, around 6:15 a.m., Kim Yo-jong issued a statement calling on South Korea to pass a new law that criminalizes sending leaflets and anything else with any minimum monetary value across the border into North Korea. What kinds of things? Well, a lot of defector North Korean emigres in South Korea become human rights activists, and they send via balloons, flying into North Korea, all sorts of things like dollar bills, a bar of soap, pair of socks, the Bible, toothbrush, toothpaste, all of these, basic amenities that are severely lacking in North Korea. And the regime doesn't like that, understandably, because the leaflets are very critical of Kim Jong-un and the regime. So Kim Yo-jong said to South Korea, pass a new law and put these criminals in jail. Astoundingly, 4 hours later, the Ministry of Unification, which manages inter-Korean relations, the South Korean Ministry of Unification, the chief spokesman called for an unscheduled press conference and issued a statement saying, yes, we will work on it. And then within the next hour, the Blue House, the President's office, even the Ministry of National Defense and other government agencies all chimed in. Sending leaflets into North Korea is all bad, nothing good comes of it, and we will come up with such a law that criminalizes such activities. It's a universal human right, the right to receive and impart information. It's Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was drafted in the 1940s, but it was very artful in that it's a basic universal human right to share and to disseminate information regardless of borders and medium in any format. And in those days, all we had was newspapers and radio and TV, but North Korea, of course, closely fends off any outside information to its best ability. So for South Korea, a democracy to say, okay, we will put people in jail who send leaflets and basic information to North Korea. It was amazing. It's the first time that the North Korean despotess or dictator has successfully extended its brutal censorship of its own people across the border into South Korea. It's never been achieved. She's the first. Kim Il-sung could never do it. Kim Jong-il couldn't do it. Kim Jong-un couldn't do it. If Kim Jong-un had issued that order, probably South Korea would not have followed up on it with such alacrity, with such eagerness. But a pretty woman says it, okay, done. Moreover, in the same month, in June 2020, on June 13th, Kim Yo-jong issued a statement and again mentioned that her authority is invested by her brother, the party, and the state, and warned that the useless North Korea-South Korea Joint Liaison Office, it's a 4-story building, it was, funded entirely with South Korean government funds, but located in Kaesong, just miles north of the border between the two Korean states. She said this useless building, soon you'll see, destroyed. 3 days later, destroyed it was. They blew it up. So Kim Yo-jong, constantly reminds the world that I have the authority to pursue our nation's foreign policy vis-a-vis South Korea, the US, and the world. She threatened to even dispatch troops into the border region, a threatening act. And in a remarkable circus act, the Kim siblings, brother and sister, the despotic duo, conned the world by having the sister play the role of the even worse cop to the very bad cop that is Kim Jong-un. What I mean is, in late June, we're still in 2020, after she issued this statement, I'm going to deploy troops into the border region. At the end of the month, Kim Jong-un said, for now, we will suspend that order. We will suspend that option. Thus coming across as the more restrained, sane party, while his little sister is wild, she's crazy and she's aggressive. It's a very clever trick, role reversal, and it sets the stage for Kim Yo-jong to play her old role of the charming princess from Pyongyang when North Korea goes back to a post-provocation peace ploy, a charm offensive. She will once again become the face of a very unattractive nation. And, there's sexism, latent sexism in many of us, men and women, I would suggest. Not all, of course, but we tend to look down on young women. We tend to think that they are malleable, like I have influence over her. I'm so smart or powerful or wealthy. I can mold her. I can, change her. It's a dangerous assumption because the next time Kim Yo-jong is the charming princess calling for peace talks and denuclearization and all that, her interlocutors, first of all, it will be impossible for them to say no, because then you come across as the petulant party uninterested in peace. Moreover, you will want to believe what she's saying because the message, the promising message of peace is coming from a very pretty young princess. You will think that this time it's real. This time we're going to have peace and unification and denuclearization. Don't make that assumption. That is my message. Just because it's a pretty face saying all those sweet things instead of her more surly, less photogenic brother, no, it doesn't mean it's genuine.
And the diatribes Kim Yo-jong churns out from time to time are certainly meant to be demeaning. And yes, by such demeaning vituperation, she apparently also demeans herself. Then how do you look at a brother and dictator Kim Jong-un assigning his sister such a dirty and demeaning job?
You're right. In a normal system, a democracy, playing that role of a very preeminent, powerful official like Kim Yo-jong, issuing all these dirty messages, vulgar, demeaning messages, would be not only improper, but very strange. But North Korea is a very weird nation. I would say it's the strangest place on earth. In fact, in January 2023, I had an occasion to visit the Panmunjom Inter-Korean Border Village with some colleagues. And one of them, Sir John Scarlett, who is a retired former chief of the British Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, he said, looking at North Korea, he said to me, I've traveled all over the world and this is the strangest place on earth. But that's just what we could see with our naked eyes. Travel further into North Korea is extremely weird, extremely unique. So different, I often say uniquely unique, which is improper because unique is an absolute adjective. But anyway, in North Korea, a pretty princess saying those vile things would strike fear in other top officials. And again, it would be easier to stomach, to swallow your wounded pride if the vituperation comes from a pretty face instead of her brother. Because we are dismissive of women, young women, we tend to be more dismissive of what they say. It's forgivable. It can be forgotten. Again, when they revert, go back to a charm offensive, and they do. North Korea doesn't just go berserk and endlessly climb up the ladder of escalation and calling for war. No, they don't. They dramatically change the tune into a happy melody every now and then. This was true of Kim Il-sung in 1972 when President Richard Nixon visited China and met with Chairman Mao and so on. That was a big change in the geopolitics of the Cold War. So what did Kim Il-sung do? Kim Il-sung, as well as America's dependent states like South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, were very nervous about the possibility of the U.S. abandoning them or not defending them anymore. And I would think also client states of China were very nervous too, because Mao was shaking hands with a U.S. president, fearful of China perhaps changing sides or abandoning them, whether it's Hanoi or Pyongyang or other states. What did Kim Il-sung do? He came out smiling, met with reporters from the New York Times, Harrison Salisbury, who was the former bureau chief, New York Times bureau chief in Moscow, and Yoon Lee, who was the then Japan bureau chief. For 3 hours, on May 26, 1972, Kim Il-sung received 2 New York Times reporters and talked for 3 hours. And he came across as not only not crazy, but extremely well-informed, very intelligent, and even charming, and even self-effacing, making jokes, making fun of himself and his country, thus coming across as a reasonable person. The next month in June, Kim Il-sung met a Washington Post reporter. The next month in July, a Harvard Law School professor, and many, many Japanese reporters throughout the year. And everyone came away with a view, wow, they're not crazy, they're really kind of smart, and yeah, we can do business with them. Same thing with Kim Il-sung's son, Kim Jong-il, who inherited power in 1994. For the first 6 years, Kim Jong-il never traveled abroad, never received a foreign delegation or head of state, and then boom, in May 2000, he pops up in Beijing. Why? Because he had the first ever unprecedented inter-Korean summit meeting coming up the next month in June. And then in July, Kim Jong-il received a man called Vladimir Putin. Putin is the first and only top Russian or Soviet leader ever to visit North Korea. And I think Putin will probably visit North Korea soon, perhaps even within this year and certainly next year. And then Kim Jong-il, back in 2000, sent a special envoy to President Bill Clinton, Vice Marshal Cho Myung-lok, who came with a giant envelope, invitation letter, inviting Clinton to come to North Korea. And within a fortnight, Madeleine Albright, the U.S. Secretary of State, visited Pyongyang and was toasting Kim Jong-il and so on. That visit never took place, the visit by Clinton, but he was very interested. And due to domestic situation, election and vote recount between George W. Bush and Al Gore, time ran out. So it didn't happen, but still, Kim Jong-il the next January visited China again and visited the special economic zone cities. Zhuhai, Guangdong, visited Shanghai as well, visiting Huawei and all these tech companies, imitating Deng Xiaoping, the Southern Tour, so-called, by Deng Xiaoping in the early 1990s, a decade after his reform, thus coming across as a liberal-minded, reform-minded leader, as a reasonable guy. Kim Jong-un, just like his dad, for the first 6 years upon inheriting power, never met with a single world leader, received Dennis Rodman, the former great basketball player, several times, but never received a foreign leader, never traveled abroad. Then, boom, in late March 2018, he's in Beijing. Why? Because he had an important summit meeting coming up with the South Korean president, Moon Jae-in, in April, and he had already requested a meeting with US President Donald Trump, and President Trump said, okay, let's do it, the sooner the better. Thus, through a series of summit meetings, which were preceded by this exciting visit to South Korea by the sister, by Kim Yo-jong, in February 2018, she sort of softened up her targets by Kim Jong-un by sending his sister to South Korea for the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics that South Korea hosted on February 9th, 2018. She set the stage for her brother's debut on the world stage by shaking hands with President Xi Jinping, President Moon Jae-in, President Donald Trump, and so on. So North Korea does this very well. They not only provoke can fire missiles and kill their own people and starve their own people with impunity, they're very good at propaganda. When they do diplomatic outreach, everyone, when North Korea beckons, says, let's talk, everyone comes with a lot of money, food, fuel, and other concessions. Over the past 30 years of nuclear diplomacy, North Korea has received from South Korea, from China, from the United States, Japan, Russia, tens of billions of dollars worth of goodies, a lot of cash too from South Korea. What has the other team, other countries gotten? A nuclear North Korea. So they're very clever, they're not crazy. We must take them, Kim Jong-un and Kim Yo-jong, very seriously.
And do you think that Kim Jong-un may one day assign his darling daughter the dirty, demeaning, and supposedly very, very important job?
It's a possibility if Kim Jong-un wants to raise his daughter's profile. I mean, she's not even 12, maybe 10 or 11 or 12 at the moment. She's prepubescent, she's a child. What can a 10-year-old do? You know, issue a statement, give a speech, receive a foreign delegation? No, she's still a girl. But 10 years from now, she'll be an adult, young adult. 15 years from now, maybe she'll play a prominent role in her nation, in her government. At that point, if Kim Jong-un wants to build her up, her stature, her presence, her power, it's conceivable that he might have his cute daughter issue nasty-sounding statements as well. But you know, it remains to be seen.
Now, both Kim Jong-un and Kim Yo-jong are still young, and they are cruel, just like their father and grandfather, who wouldn't hesitate to murder people, to execute people, including their family members, like their half-brother or their uncle. Considering they both received part of their education from Switzerland, how did they become what they are today?
Well, it's the nature of the regime, this cruel absolute power that they inherited. I think exposure to Europe, study abroad, is not a realistic or accurate indicator of any future policy or one's character. We have this myth. When Kim Jong-un came to power, a lot of people, North Korea experts, believed that Kim Jong-un would be like Deng Xiaoping just because he lived in Europe. Deng Xiaoping lived in France. He studied there for about 4 years as a young man. Kim Jong-un lived in Switzerland for 4 years as a young boy and teenager. Well, for every Deng Xiaoping, there's a Pol Pot, who also lived and studied in France, in Paris, in his 20s, and managed to kill perhaps a third of his own people. So exposure to European cosmopolitanism is no indicator of a reform-minded leader.
We know that the North Koreans have been suffering from hunger and starvation for decades. And of all the countries in the world today which are suffering from hunger or undernourishment, why is North Korea so special and unique, in your view?
Yes, North Korea is unique in many aspects. Arguably, North Korea has the world's biggest standing army per its population. It's a small nation in terms of its population, 25 million or so, but they have one of the biggest standing armies, 1.2 million men. Only China and the United States maintain a bigger army, but of course the population of China is 1.5 billion or more, 40 million in the US. So North Korea is very weird, and the most unique, the most weird, the strangest thing to me about North Korea is this food insecurity situation that's been going on for 30 years, at least 30 years, since the onset of the famine in the mid-19 mid-90s. North Korea is the only industrialized, literate, urbanized society to undergo a famine in world history. And I believe North Korea forever will remain forever the only such country, industrialization with the advantages of 100%, almost 100% adult literacy. What is literacy? Its basic definition is, say, somebody above the age of 16 who can read and write. What? Write a book? No. Write your own name. Read simple sentences. That's the definition of literacy. And in our world today, unfortunately, in many other areas of the world, there are still countries where adult illiteracy is as high as 80%. People who can't even write their own name, who are innumerate, who can't count from 1 to 10. In many impoverished countries in sub-Saharan Africa, you see that, as well as some other regions of the world. North Korea does not fit that description. So for an industrialized, literate country like North Korea to go through a famine, which may have killed off 10% of its population from about 1995 to 1998, it's a strange development. It's a man-made famine catastrophe. Says who? The United Nations. In a monumental 2014 Human Rights Report, 304 pages or so, this report alleges that Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un are guilty of, quote, knowingly causing prolonged starvation, end quote. That the famine was the result of, quote, deliberate mass starvation, end quote. But to the ordinary observer, false theories like, oh, it's climate change, poor soil management, bad luck, floods, drought, bad weather, and US sanctions. That's why they're hungry. That simple and entirely baseless narrative is easier to comprehend. It's easier to accept than the argument that no, the regime refuses to spend a portion of its vast wealth with which to import food. They have the money. If the North Korean regime spent per year about $200 million to $400 million with which to buy grain and distributed it fairly, no one in North Korea, no man, woman, child would starve, would be hungry at all. But North Korea refuses to do that, spend even a tiny fraction of its vast wealth on food. That's why North Koreans are hungry, by the decisions made by the regime to let the people suffer while they live an extravagant life, while they put all their nation's resources, most of it on nuclear weapons development, missile development, and so on. So it's a tragic situation that today, every year, without fail, since the famine of the mid-90s, that North Korea is riddled with hunger, while in China or South Korea, no one's dying of starvation, malnourishment, hardly anyone. But many people say, no, it's climate change and US sanctions that explain the food situation in North Korea. Then my retort, my question is, how does one explain that each year, without fail, that climate change and sanctions stop right at the border with China and with South Korea? That is, there's no one starving in South Korea or in China. It's only in North Korea. Can climate change just like target a country for 30 years, for every year, every year for 30 years now? I don't think so.
And according to you, the Kim family regime has been ruling North Korea through a trick of misery and mystery. Would you please give us a description of the trick and how it works?
Yes. The basic dynamic in the Korean Peninsula is you have two Korean states, North Korea, South Korea. Each claims to be the sole legitimate country legitimate Korea, and each denies the other as a sovereign state. There's an element of fiction there, but that's the reality. Now, of the two Korean states, if you ask a pedestrian on the street, which Korea, in your view, is the more successful one, the more legitimate one? I think most people around the world would say South Korea. That is a problem for the Kim regime. Is Kim Jong-un content to be forever relegated forever to be the leader of the loser Korean state, the inferior Korean state? I doubt it. So what does North Korea seek? Well, according to its constitution, the supreme national task of the party and the state is reunification. What kind of reunification? Absorption, being absorbed by South Korea? I don't think so. So what does that mean? Well, incorporation of South Korean territory and the people. Vietnam-style reunification by the communist system. Is that a pipe dream? Well, it depends on your view, but I would say North Korea has been methodically making advancement toward that ultimate national goal, the supreme national task. With respect to mystery, with respect to misery, because of the income disparity, because South Korea is richer, it's much more pleasant, it's freer, much more freer, much freer. So because South Korea is pleasant while North Korea is not, the regime needs to conceal basic facts, basic information, that there's no one starving in South Korea, that South Korea is an affluent country, a free country. So North Korea not only tries to block out information from the outside world, but also tries to deprive systematically its own people of basic information, basic realities, that there's no one starving in South Korea, people drive nice cars, they live in nice apartments, they eat well. North Korea doesn't want the people to know all that, and Kim Jong-un passed a law in December 2020 intensifying punishment for anyone who watches South Korean TV or film or listens to South Korean music. If you are caught distributing it, that's capital punishment, public execution. If you are caught watching it, you can be jailed for 15 years. So North Korea practices not only misery in starving its people, but also mystery toward its own people and the outside world. Hence, when the North Korean leader says pleasant-sounding things like "let's talk," one assumes that, wow, this is the path to a happier future. The North Korean leader really wants peace and denuclearization.
Apparently, the current Kim Jong-un and Kim Il-jung sibling regime continues to play with the trick of misery and mystery. What can the international community do to neutralize the trick and to bring lasting relief to North Korean people?
I think, military experts, governments take North Korea's military power seriously. They have a big army, they have a big conventional military, conventional weapons, nuclear weapons, intercontinental ballistic weapons, so we have to take them seriously. But others look at the funny-looking North Korean dictator with his idiosyncratic hairstyle and clothing and crazy-sounding things he says. I mean, North Korea is so weird. It's a mix, amalgam of medieval mores, old-fashioned, strange demeanor and buffoonish bellicosity. Sometimes they say, Kim Jong-un said, he's going to nuke the White House and so on. It's so strange that they're so strange we think they're half crazy, or we tend to underestimate them or patronize them. That hasn't worked very well over the past decades for the United States, for South Korea and other democracies. So we have to take them seriously, and we have to be guarded when North Korea plays nice again and says, let's talk. whenever there is an inter-Korean summit, the South Korean president's approval rating spikes up to over 80%, which is unusual in a democracy. Weird. Because people like handshakes, people like, summit meetings, and want to believe that this time it's real, that the North Korean dictator means all these good things. So they feel happy. So every South Korean leader is tempted to pursue a summit meeting with a North Korean dictator. North Korea plays this dynamic very artfully, very effectively, by creating excitement, something close to euphoria even, with handshakes, with a pretty young woman, the princess from Pyongyang, visiting South Korea and charming much of the South Korean nation. What did she do? She just showed up, smiled a little, ate a little, drank a little, shook hands, didn't issue a single public statement. But it seemed at the time, in February 2018, it seemed that the entire nation fell in love with her because of the mystery, the mystique, the aura of the Kim family. Wow, Kim Jong-un sent his own sister to South Korea. It must mean that this is a harbinger message of peace, reunification. That's what people want to believe. And that plays to North Korea's advantage.
And your book laments successive American administrations' inadequate efforts to cope with the North Korean nuclear problem. And what should adequate efforts look like?
Well, it's probably too late to roll back North Korea's nuclear weapons program, and there is no single U.S. administration that should bear the blame. This has been a bipartisan failure, nuclear diplomacy vis-a-vis North Korea. And over the past 30 years, again, North Korea has received tens of billions of dollars worth of goodies, while Team USA has received a North Korea with maybe 50 or more nuclear bombs. I think, again, the tendency to patronize, to underestimate North Korea is a fallacy. It's a dangerous mistake. And just because the next time North Korea says, let's talk, she will be the messenger, just because it's a pretty young woman, many people will want to believe that, oh, maybe this time it's real. Let's give it a try. Well, be guarded. Be not cynical, but skeptical. Maintain skepticism and don't believe everything that they say, whether it's Kim Jong-un or Kim Il-jung. Another fallacy and failure is the view on financial sanctions. People often say sanctions never work. It's not entirely true. Sanctions rarely bring about fundamental change in the nature of the target nation or a complete departure from policy, but they are an effective tool of diplomacy, non-lethal, legitimate tool of pressure. But the problem is sanctions have to be enforced. And that is very laborious, time-consuming, difficult job. Like domestic law enforcement, I mean, the police have to investigate, build up a case, have the authority to issue a warrant to arrest suspected criminals and so on, all the time. Unless domestic law is enforced, the toughest laws on the books have no meaning. People have to do the job. Same with sanctions enforcement, and most nations of the world don't want to do it because it's time-consuming, it's difficult, it's laborious. And meaningful sanctions on North Korea have never been maintained, sustained for more than a year. When Kim Jong-un proposed to Donald Trump, let's meet, sanctions enforcement became hollow as of the spring of 2018. So you have to maintain sanctions pressure over at least 5 years to bring about some shift, some change. It's never been done, and now it's probably too late.
And it's reported that you consider China the foremost enabler of the Kim family regime. But as we know that the Kim family for 3 generations has been very, very suspicious of Beijing. How come Beijing became the foremost enabler? What about Russia? And as we know that Kim Jong-un has just met with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and they both declared their intention for close cooperation.
Sure. Historically, the Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union, was the most generous sponsor of North Korea, but the People's Republic of China was number 2. The PRC gave China throughout the 50s and 60s and 70s about the same amount of money and food and fuel aid from Eastern Europe, from the Eastern, Soviet bloc nations. But in the early 1990s, in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union, friendship prices and free gifts from Soviet Union came to an end. China normalized diplomatic relations with South Korea, which the Kim regime did not like, and China became less generous. And in part, those are factors that led to the famine, which could have been prevented, but there were some debilitating factors at play for the North Korean regime. But as of 2000, Beijing resumed its very generous aid to North Korea. What, out of altruism? Possibly, but probably not. Nation states are selfish. It's all about national interest, personal interest. For China, it makes sense to build up North Korea, because if North Korea were to collapse, there would be probably a humanitarian crisis, refugees flowing into China itself. No nation relishes hundreds of thousands or even thousands of illegal immigrants coming into their border, within their border. So for a variety of reasons, the most important perhaps that North Korea is useful to China in China's long-term competition, strategic competition against the United States. China, for that reason, builds up North Korea. President Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un had their first meeting only in March 2018. Xi came to power in late 2012, early 2013. Kim Jong-un came to power in early 2012. So for 6 years, the two did not meet. And sometimes there were insults hurled. When North Korea, Kim Jong-un, in February 2013, conducted his nation's 3rd nuclear test. It was February 12, 2013, right in the middle of the most important holiday in China, Lunar New Year holiday, Xi Jinping's first as the top leader. President Xi was very irate. The Chinese officials were very displeased, quite angry. And Xi Jinping, according to President Obama, I had a rare opportunity to advise him in the White House in April 2013. President Obama said, "I think the Chinese will put some hurt on North Korea." President Xi told me himself, in fact said, "I'm going to teach that SOB, son of a lesson." That's what President Xi said. I don't know which Chinese word President Xi used. I'm just guessing, Wang Badan or something like that. I'm going to teach that SOB a lesson. That's what President Xi, according to President Obama, told him. And President Obama really wanted to believe that. Will now China turn the tap off, to use his words, Obama's words? I said no. A slap on the wrist, maybe close some North Korean bank accounts in China, and then go back to giving generously to China. And President Obama didn't like to hear that, but I insisted. Based on history, and indeed, two-way trade between China and North Korea that year in 2013 hit an all-time high, $6.5 billion, meaning generous aid to North Korea from China. This is frustrating to the US and its allies maybe, but it's the reality. It's not altruism, it's not humanism, it's just cold national interest. Chinese leaders would have to have their head examined if they say, bye-bye, North Korea, we don't want to talk to you anymore, good luck. They will not do that out of national interest. Just as Chairman Mao made the difficult decision to enter the Korean War as the US UN troops, US-led troops, approached the border. Out of altruism, out of humanitarian concerns for Kim Il-sung and the leadership? No, I don't think so. Out of national interest.
Toward the end of your book, you said something to the effect that malicious or venomous as Kim Yo-jong may have been, once she'd choose to start a new charm offensive again, many people in the world would fall for it, enamored and enchanted by her again. It seems you are quite pessimistic about people's short-term memory. Why?
So on April 27th, 2018, Kim Jong-un and the then South Korean President Moon held their first meeting. Shortly past 9 a.m., Kim Jong-un came out of the North Korean building that faces a South Korean building with the border, the division in the middle, in his signature black Mao suit, very confident, arms swinging like this, and then over the border, which is a raised little brick platform, the two men shook hands. And I thought Kim Jong-un would do this because he wants to act like the boss, the host. He pulled President Moon into his side gently, and President Moon was caught off guard, but happily walked in. They stepped in and out of North Korea, holding hands, thus coming across as a very affable chap, as a reasonable person. It was a transformation of a brutal dictator image to, a cosmopolitan, nice guy. It's tremendous. And at that time, the world's focus, media attention was on this development. It was heavily covered by the international press. And on a live BBC radio interview, the other guest was exuberant. She was a very seasoned reporter for a major newspaper, and she had covered previous summits by Kim Jong-un's father, but she said, I feel this time it's real. Many people in the press room in South Korea, thousands of people, many are in tears, she said, and you can look up on YouTube, many were crying actually. They were so moved by Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in shaking hands. And I didn't say anything, and then the moderator said, what about you, Mr. Lee? And I said, I've seen this movie before. By now it's Rambo 4. Rambo, the first movie, First Blood, was a good movie, but by the time you've seen Rambo 4, you have a good idea how the movie ends. It's all fake. And then she grew kind of angry at me, and she said, why are you so cynical? And I said, well, if you've been repeatedly robbed or beaten by the tag team of history and reality, you can be forgiven for being a bit skeptical. People have short-term memory. They don't know history. They like drama. It's dramatic. This cruel tyrant comes across as a reasonable person, interested in peace, quite polite, quite normal. So they like to believe that. But again, I've seen this movie before, going back to the grandfather and the father. It's Rambo 4, and Rambo 5, she will star in that movie.
Yeah, the last one, I want to have a follow-up question, although the question perhaps a little big, too big, but I want to ask it anyway. As we know, the Republic of Korea, or South Korea, is a free country, and the people there are free to get all the information they need. Then how come there were so many people over there so easily enchanted by the Kim regime, or especially by the Kim Yo-jong?
Yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon, and I suppose to be courteous, I would say that the people of South Korean people have lived with a threatening North Korea for decades. So when North Korea shoots a missile or two, most people don't care. It's not the top news. When North Korea issues a threat, most people say, oh, they're just crazy. It's all bluff, no bite. They're just saying things and go on with their very busy, productive daily lives. And in the school system in South Korea, they don't teach you in middle school or high school anything about North Korea. So most South Korean people are apathetic, indifferent about North Korea, and really ignorant about North Korea. There's no incentive for them to study North Korea because North Korea is not on the annual national college entrance exam. If it were, they would all become experts. They would study very hard. So there's that. And then denialism, because, you can't live in constant fear of North Korea as a society, as a country, in constant fear there's going to be a war. They're going to invade or kill us, shoot at us. You can't live like that. So there's an element of denialism. Oh, they're just paranoid. Oh, America's like pressuring them, so they're reacting in a crazy way. They're like, awkward, cumbersome, distant relatives. They want money. Give them some money, be nice, and then they'll go away. It's that kind of blasé, ignorance-based attitude and perception that is easily malleable. It sways. Whenever the North Korean dictator smiles and shakes hands, then based on that apathy and lack of knowledge of North Korea, you want to believe it because it's so dramatic. It's a fun story. It's a problem.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time and for your very insightful observations.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.